Thank you very much. It's always very appreciated. And thank you to the chair of this committee who originally sponsored our very first member motion, which started the dialogue. The dialogue actually with the province began not just in July or June per se. It actually began in January 2011 with my minister, with my member of provincial parliament, Glenn Murray. Minister Murray and I had been working on community planning projects, and we had been working throughout our various neighborhoods. Collectively, we have divided our areas into 5 distinct neighborhoods to really determine what the area needs were. And one of the rising priorities that kept coming up in every single neighborhood was the requirement and the need for the green space. We then identified together that the 2.1 acres of land known as East of Bay or 11 Wellesley was an appropriate and very suitable site for parkland development. The history to 11 Wellesley is actually quite troubled. It began in a conversation with the province, with Premier Bob Rae actually, back in 1980. And Premier Rae at that time had dedicated the land for public use. He said, this is public land for public use, and we are going to build a new ballet company house as well as a new opera center. Those dreams never materialized, and the public land fell into a place of abandonment, but it never stopped being public land. And for over 20 years, my community has had to stare into this abandoned site. This site that had been engulfed by a fence that was 8 feet tall that wrapped the entire perimeter. And as you can imagine, as the rest of Bay Street developed, which was all parking lots at one time, I recall as a child, tower after tower after tower went up. And there was no strategy from the province nor the city at that point in time to make sure that we were going to build neighborhoods that were going to be inclusive and green, and that they were going to be affordable, and that we're going to have the right balance of mixed income uses. Now, as we've absorbed more and more intensification in the area, what we don't have, and we haven't done very well as a city nor as the province, is to ensure that we're able to provide the social infrastructure that's required in order for us to grow the population. So I think that living downtown, or perhaps working and studying and playing downtown, doesn't mean that you abandon all other rights. So just because one is a downtown resident doesn't mean that we've all chosen to live in concrete jungles. Just as much as those who are living in our suburban neighborhoods, they also deserve mass public transit that's affordable, flexible, and reliable. So it's about bringing the health of the community into a space that we are going to be able to share this and build our city together. And it's not a suburban issue or a downtown issue that I see from some of the questions that are coming out, that perhaps that's where the conversation may be going. It very much is not. It's about building a city that's going to be inclusive. It's going to be building a city that's going to be sustainable and healthy and green. The Tall Buildings Guideline was adopted by Council, and that Tall Buildings Guideline very clearly outlined that the as-of-right height on this site was going to be 20 stories tall. Subsequently, they also had one little addendum note that said if an applicant is interested in submitting a rezoning, you could possibly get up to 35 stories. That report, the Tall Buildings Guideline, was authored by a company called Urban Strategies. Urban Strategy was retained by the city through a 7-year process to produce the Tall Buildings Inviting Change in Downtown Toronto Guidelines. Subsequently, Infrastructure Ontario hired that same company called Urban Strategies, who then in May 2012 produced a report called the Optimal Use Study, and what they proposed were 2 to 3 towers on that same site. Should I finish? So because this is actually very important. I think it's very important to note that the same company that City of Toronto hired to produce the Tall Buildings Inviting Change in Downtown Toronto guideline was then hired by Infrastructure Ontario, who then said to the real estate brokers and the listing brokers that you can come in and build up to 45 to 55 stories. The ink on the Tall Buildings guideline wasn't even dry, and this is what they're now proposing to the free market. Now, for all sorts of reasons, I can tell you that seems rather disingenuous. Nevertheless, those are the conditions around planning and development that exist, not just in Ward 27, but I can tell you that they exist all over the City of Toronto. And when we have the Ontario Municipal Board that overrides city decisions, this is what happens to our planning process. Now, even if we were to have a very clearly outlined regiment on how to acquire parkland, which we do, it is often difficult to do so in downtown areas because the sites are so small. And when the sites are so small, it is not always possible for the developer to provide us on-site parkland dedication, which is why we have so much development, and therefore the development is not able to produce the same amount of green space that's required, that's legislative, in order to match development. I think this is important for the councillors to note. Councillor Ford, Councillor Crisanti, I have 137 open development applications in Ward 27 alone. That's open. This has nothing to do with cranes in the air right now. These are the applications we have before us. When we're talking about which are the wards that are capitalizing the parkland acquisition or parkland dedication fund, I can tell you that Ward 27 has hit above its weight. The money that is allocated to the north or south districts or the global fund is actually coming from the wards that are generating the development. So not only is the community being asked to bear the intensification and absorb the development, we're also being asked to share the funds. I never ever stop the funds from flowing out of the ward. But when we ask for a small piece of it coming back into the ward, I hope that we can have your support. And that small parcel of money that's been outlined on certain color paper will allow me to get to the table and to negotiate with whoever it is that's the entity that controls the title of that land, whether it's Infrastructure Ontario or a private developer, and parlay that into additional acquisition. That's what it will enable us to do. If we're not able to reach a deal, if I don't feel like we're going to get good value for those funds, I will certainly not use the money. That is very clear. So hopefully you'll be able to support us and to support the local community, and then as we move forward into the future, that we will be able to work together to make our city together, you and I, suburban downtown, greener, cleaner, more affordable for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wong Tam.